Okay, well, welcome everyone to ANC 34G's special meeting tonight. This meeting is a continuation of our April 12th meeting when Director Trueblood from the Office of Planning was with us to answer questions about the small area plan. And we're going to pick up essentially from where we left off there. Tonight, as usual in our meetings, the commissioners will have audio and video. Director Trueblood also will have audio and video because he's going to be the one answering the questions. If there's a need, Commissioner Gore can elevate people to become a panelist, and he'll give you audio and visual. So we'll let you know as we go through the meeting about that. If you would please rename yourself if it's not an apparent name so that we'll be able to recognize you. You can do that by clicking on your name and you should be able to rename yourself. This meeting is going to be devoted, as I said, to almost entirely to the questions that you have posed and are posing about the small area plan to Director Trueblood. We have collected all of the questions that were in the Q&A and in the chat from our April 12th meeting, and we've compiled those. We weren't able to get to all of those questions at our meeting on April 12th, and so we're going to pick up again with those now. And we'll go through all of those questions first. If there are any new questions that you have or that arise as we're going through the discussion tonight, please put them in the Q&A rather than in the chat. Put your questions in the Q&A. If you have comments that you'd like to make, you can also make those, but we prefer if you put those into the chat. It'd just be easier for us to segregate them between the questions and those that are just purely comments. I had asked everyone or anyone who had a question beforehand to send them to me. I provided my email address in the posts that we put on the listserv and various other places. And I've received no questions there. But the second part of the meeting will be an opportunity for anyone else who hasn't asked questions to raise those questions at that time. We'll go through one round of questions for everyone so that everyone has an opportunity to ask a question before we go to the second round with people who have multiple questions. As I indicated a minute ago, the meeting is going to be recorded and we'll be posting that on the ANC's YouTube channel. Okay, as I said, first thing we're going to do is go through the questions that we had from last time. First, all the commissioners should introduce themselves. I forgot about that completely. I'm Randy Speck. I'm the chair of ANC 34G, and I represent the single member district ANC 34G03, which is basically the space between Utah, Nebraska, and Broad Branch. Peter, you want to go next?
I'm Peter Gosselin. I represent District 6, which is basically the west side of Connecticut from the Western Avenue border with Maryland and the Chevy Chase Circle to Military to 41st to Western, and a peninsula coming to the east where I happen to live.
Connie?
Hello, my name is Connie Chang, and I'm the commissioner for single member district number 5. And I'm on the east side of Connecticut, basically location up where there's several commercial stores, and then the community center, Chevy Chase Library, up to the Circle, Western, and back down on Broad Branch Market, basically, and further with the peninsula. So it's a little bit funky, but yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm with 3G07, and that's the area bounded by Nevada, Nebraska, Reno, and Military.
And Lisa?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Gore, and I'm the commissioner for 3G01, which is Hawthorne and portions of Barnaby Woods. And my area is basically Oregon Avenue to Western Avenue to Upland, a little past Pinehurst Circle, back over some portions of Tennyson, and then around Beach, back up to Oregon Avenue.
And Michael?
Sorry, I was on mute. I am Michael Zeldin, 3G04, which is sort of Morrison to Tennyson to part of Broad Branch and Utah to Western, and it includes the Lafayette Elementary School. And this is my first year as a commissioner.
Okay, we do have a quorum tonight. I don't think we're going to be conducting any official formal business, but we do have a quorum tonight. And Director Trueblood, you want to introduce yourself now too?
Yes, my name is Andrew Trueblood, and I am the director of the DC Office of Planning. I just want to thank you, Chairman Speck and commissioners, for hosting this special event, special meeting, and joining, making time to continue the conversation, especially Commissioner Speck, helping get the questions together and helping, I think, structure this. I personally appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners have questions or comments they want to make? Okay, well, we'll just get right into the questions. Michael.
Sorry, Randy. At one point I had mentioned in an earlier email to you, I think it would be helpful. I know we have a Q&A principally, but I think in answering some of these Q&As, if Chris could just show the drawings that he did, it'll help people visualize for a minute, and then we can just see the Q&As.
I don't think we're prepared to do that tonight, Chris, right? Am I right? You're muted, Chris.
Yeah, I thought we were going to do that on Monday. I think everybody, Lisa, you have that PowerPoint. If you could put that on, I could very quickly just mention it, go through it. Or I could, if you want, you could make. I guess what do you have to do? Make me a presenter, or
a co-host. Yeah, I can make you co-host. You want to do that, Chris?
Yeah, why don't you do that? Let me.
Okay.
Thanks. I could.
I don't think we need to take a lot of time. I just think that visualization that Chris did is very helpful.
Right,
and I'll be quiet for the rest of the meeting, I promise.
Let me get it on my computer here.
Won't happen.
Yeah, no.
I promise.
Okay, so what do I do here now? I just put it on my computer?
Yeah, you should be able to share content.
Nope.
See share.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Nope.
Then you have to select it on your screen, Chris, and then hit share. Make sure it's highlighted. Then I think at the lower right, hit share.
I think this is beyond my intelligence here.
If you send it to, can you email it to me and I'll pull it up?
Sure.
And what I would suggest is that we go ahead, rather than spend time on this, that we go ahead and start the questions, and then when
we can
you're ready to put that up, we can do it. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, there will be an appropriate point in the questions when we start talking about the height of buildings that we can talk about that and put it up at that point. Okay.
Yeah, and so Director Trueblood, for your edification, what I'm asking be done is that what Chris did using his architectural skills is he took photos of the gateway of Connecticut Avenue and then drew lines where 40 feet would be, 50 feet would be, 65 feet would be. So when you answer questions about what is the height looks, there's a nice visual for you to help you.
We're going to get to that really quickly. Connie?
Just to let you know, John is joining us. The 6:37, he was slightly confused, but he'll be on the call very shortly.
Okay. All right. Okay. The first question I'm going to pose is really one to me because they asked, someone asked, do the ANCs have a legal right to file litigation? And it was in the context of an appeal of a zoning commission order. And I've checked thoroughly with the Office of Advisory Neighborhood Commissions. And indeed, the ANC as the ANC cannot file an appeal to a court. We can do an administrative appeal, but we can't do a legal appeal to the Court of Appeals. But as individual commissioners, we can file an appeal and in our individual capacity. And we can make the argument that the zoning commission did not give great weight to the ANC's views as it is required to do. And so there is a way that individual ANC commissioners can carry that forward and make sure that the Court of Appeals hears that question, that argument about giving the ANC's great weight.
And Randy, they're doing that in their capacity as a
No,
commissioner?
as an
They're just doing it as an individual.
individual
So
citizen.
we're no different than
Correct,
a private citizen doing it.
correct. But the ANC commissioners can do that,
But yeah.
just like anyone else. Okay, the next couple of questions, Director Trueblood, relate to building height. And so Lisa, if you've got that, and you can put it up right now, that would be probably helpful.
Okay.
Or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours a night. Botox prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. So if you haven't tried Botox for your chronic migraine, check with the doctor if Botox.
Should we go ahead with the questions?
Got the email? Oh, here we
Oh,
go.
there it is. Here it goes. Okay,
Okay,
all right.
so can you hear me? Yeah. So I went and photographed each block of the Connecticut Avenue commercial district, and I superimposed the various height limits on the each picture. So 40 feet represents the current zoning. Oh, what happened?
Oh. Wait a minute.
40 feet represents the current zoning, which is MU3A, which is 40 feet. If we go to what's been talked about, which is an MU4, which is moderate density residential, low density commercial, you can go, the standard height is, building height limit is 40 feet, but with inclusionary zoning, it goes to 50 feet. And under a PUD, you can go as high as 65 feet. So that does not, none of those heights include the penthouse of the building. So I actually spent some time today going through the zoning book and researching this. So, so this gives you an idea of what the first block between Livingston and Morrison look like. Can you go down and can you just kind of cycle through them like very quickly? Yeah, so this is the next one where Child's Play is. And you can see most of the buildings are like 25 feet. Now on this block, we actually have a building that's 40 feet tall. The M&T Bank building reaches the present building height. In the theater, the Avalon Theater comes fairly close. Okay, next, and here we come at the very end. I broke the dotted lines because the bus turnaround is just been renovated, and it's, I don't think it's a candidate right now for taller buildings. And then we go to the other side of the street, just flip down. And here we are going to Chevy Chase Circle to Northampton. There's the bank. Now there's a lot that's you know, really underdeveloped. It's like a foreign suburban building right now with parking lots all around it. The next shot is our Chevy Chase Community Center. And then after that, we have the Safeway with its big parking lot, which is not very urban. And finally, we have the building over here where the small building where the bank is and the fishery and Blue 44 plus a gas station. So that's that.
Okay,
Very
thank you,
helpful.
Chris.
You're welcome.
Okay, for Director Trueblood then, the first question is, can you state without qualification that there is any restriction on developers building high rises in our commercial strip? Won't they build the maximum square footage allowed?
So I can say without qualification that I think as those demonstrate, there will not be high rises. That's just, it wouldn't be possible in any situation. I think what we're looking at here would be considered some, Main Street type buildings. There are actually taller buildings just south of Legation, for example. So I think it would be what we would think about would be contextual. We would like to work with an SAP within the small area plan to think about how these can be contextual to the neighborhood. Now, about developers building to the maximum, I think in theory that is true, but there are a number of constraints that could cut that back. I would say, especially the 65 feet. The PUD maximum is not. That there's a lot that goes into that, and oftentimes is not maxed out. If we look at the 40 or 50, or I'm sorry, the 50 foot, that, if that's zoned to MU4 as mentioned, that would be likely, but there are considerations. One of the things that we'll be looking at, I hope in the small area plan is the lot sizes. Sometimes it doesn't make sense depending on the size of the lot or the construction type or the existing building to go all the way to build all the way to the building limit. So I think it's worth noting that. And then the other thing is that we have found is things like design guidelines that can talk about how there might be step backs that would be especially if we're talking about that PUD and that 65-foot height, step backs or articulation or other things. So I think there are a number of ways that can be crafted. It's not just going to be a kind of a steady line necessarily as portrayed. But that would be some of the things that we would like to work in the small area plan, which areas might make more sense and which might make less sense. And those are the kinds of investigations we can kind of take, we can do diagrams and illustrations and answer those kinds of questions.
Okay, the next question, and I will read it the way it was written. Director Trueblood is being disingenuous. He's saying that the primary vision of the mayor is to increase equity. He's also saying we can have low-rise buildings with affordable housing, but at the same time, he's saying that we won't get low-income housing without building tall. So to get 2,000 units of affordable housing in Rock Creek West, we'll have to build tall. So is it incorrect that the neighborhood will be able to restrict this height through the SAP to low-rise buildings?
I feel there are a few questions there. I'm going to try to answer them, but hold me to account if I miss something. So first off, as I shared with you last week, my intention here is to be genuine and as giving you as much of a truth as I possibly can. Sometimes as I realized last week, it actually causes confusion, and I apologize when some of these things are quite complex. So I think I probably err on the side of being too complex in that, and I apologize. But to the questions at hand around the nature of how to get to these goals, I would say, and our analysis shows that getting to 2,000 units involves all sorts of tools. It involves looking at especially density along corridors of different types. It will be what some call high rise, what some call mid-rise, whatever you think about in Friendship Heights. It will be much a smaller scale, what I was calling kind of missing middle or Main Street kind of housing here. And it could be accessory dwelling units in other parts of the ward. And so we understand that it's all of those and they're all important. And while this is not a drastic increase in height and density, it will make a meaningful difference. We think even if it's whatever number of units it'll be important for the city and hopefully for the neighborhood. So the intention here is to figure out how, to make sure that it's done hand in hand with the community in a way that works for everybody. And so that is the intention of the small area plan, to go through that together. So I just wrote about low rise. Affordable housing can come in all the different shapes and sizes that housing comes in. And so we think I know there are opportunities here to look for affordable housing, both in terms of through some of the potentially on the private lots, but also potentially on some of the district-owned parcels as well.
Lisa, I see that John is on the call, but he's raised his hand. If you can make him a panelist, please. Okay, the next series of questions deal with how to get affordable housing, and that's a key topic for the small area plan. The first is a questioner said, we want diversity and more affordable housing in our neighborhood. What can we do to achieve these goals?
Right. I think that is, that is something, I think that's the reason we're here, is we heard that interest in trying to reach these goals, even if it, however it may happen. I think what I would suggest is the small area plan is the opportunity to really look a little deeper. Our kind of working hypothesis, I think together through the engagement process was saying a little bit of more density or a little bit more height, as we shared, is one kind of necessary aspect. But what else do we need to get there? What are the zoning changes, or what are the PUD guidelines, and what are the subsidy requirements to actually achieve what we want? And what will that achieve? Is that 10 units? Is that 100 units? I don't think anyone can say. Part of it is working with the community and also others, experts and advisors, to try and get a sense of what that could look like.
A related question then is, the questioner said, I'm confused about the connection between increasing density and affordable housing.
Yeah.
If they were seen separately, what advantage would just the increased density be for the neighborhood? There's no certainty that density will satisfactorily bring affordable housing to the neighborhood. And how many affordable housing units do you foresee? If you want development and increased density, isn't that one goal, and affordable housing is another goal? Wouldn't it be better to take them one at a time instead of this codependency that might not get the neighborhood what it wants or expects?
So I'll try and tackle that maybe one at a time, which is the way that we see it, and it sort of builds on what I just spoke to. The way we see it is to get more affordable housing, we need more housing. And to get more housing, there is the opportunity for modest density along this corridor. And so that is how you get from housing to affordable housing to density. I will say, though, however, that there is value in additional potential housing along this corridor beyond creating more housing and more affordable housing, which is, it could help create more patrons for retail. It could help create more opportunities for people to be on the street and walkable, vibrant neighborhoods. So I think there are benefits that we've seen that we would like to explore and moving forward. I will say on the connection, the overlap between housing and affordable housing, I'd say two things to that. Recently, the Zoning Commission passed a proposal that we put forward around inclusionary zoning plus that I think we talked about, which is to say that if there is additional density, some percentage of it, depending on how much additional density is received, depending on how much additional density is put in through zoning, additional affordability will be required. So today, the requirement for inclusionary zoning of any building over 9 units is between 8 and 12%. Depending on the building type and the zone. And this would be increasing it based on the private side, based on how much additional density. Now, that being said, there is a really important opportunity, which I think we would, I propose to you and to the community that we really zoom in on and focus on in this small area plan. And Commissioner Chang, it's in your single member district, which is the community center and the library. It's a district owned parcel. And it means that there's more flexibility in what can be done. And I think that is a great opportunity. Probably, it is the biggest opportunity because we already know those are being done. They're being done together. There's an opportunity, we think, to create not only a great civic space and community center and community gathering place, but also potentially housing that the neighborhood thinks is appropriate. So I think that I would love for that to be one of the main focal points of this small area plan exercise.
Peter, I do want to concentrate on having the director answer questions, but if you've got something to clarify.
a related question, given his focus on publicly owned land. Director, it is mystifying to me why WMATA, which as recently as 6 weeks ago was saying we were going to effectively end public transportation up our end of Connecticut Avenue, is renovating a bus turnaround, which is a fairly, as Chris's picture showed, is a fairly expansive piece of property, public property. And I absolutely understand what you said about the community center library. Having a public stake in the property means that we're at the table, whoever we are, the ANC, the city, in a much more powerful way than with private development. Is there any process by which we could get WMATA to reconsider the decision to renovate that center in time for it to stop?
I think we definitely can engage with WMATA. Is the renovation underway, or is it?
It is underway.
Yeah,
It is underway.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yes, it is.
There are opportunities though for building around it too. It's a small building.
I think that's, so I would say a couple things. Number one, I think the proposed cuts that for WMATA, both on rail and bus, were really jarring to everybody. Obviously, they were based on COVID-19 fare issues that have been resolved, at least for now, with federal stimulus dollars. So that is good. And I think we would be advocating for, obviously, I think, and it can be included in the small area plan, advocating for appropriate levels of service through this neighborhood. I think that is definitely a part of what I would love to discuss. Now, as it relates to this particular parcel, I think that's the kind of analysis that would be done, or that we could do, and we would bring WMATA to the table. We talk to them about all sorts of parcels across the city and see what the possibilities are. And I would say too, the nice thing about the small area plan is maybe it isn't something that would happen in 0 to 4 years, but maybe we could put in something in a plan that might happen in 5 or whenever, in some period of time when they, next time they redo their facilities or what have you. So I do think, having a vision and an idea can be useful to seed and to lead the conversation with WMATA moving forward.
Well, can I just say, if the current state of the bus facility is any example of when the next time will be, it will be when we're all dead. So we might want to intervene a little earlier than that.
I appreciate that, and I will just say that what I could see one of the purposes of a small area plan is to gather everybody, and we can all kind of say the same thing now. We can all say, listen, we've analyzed this. We think it's a big opportunity, and so whether that's the commission, whether that is DDOT, whether that is the council or OP, we can all play from the same playbook. And I think that can be very powerful, rather than WMATA hearing sort of different things from different stakeholders.
Okay, well, let's really try to focus on the questions from the community so we can get through these. We got a lot to get through tonight. Let me ask, this is another one. This is exactly as it was written in the Q&A. How does OP answer the fact that increasing density for properties in our commercial corridor runs counter to the goals of affordability and equity? Increasing density for properties increases their assessed value. This would make them more expensive for the city to acquire for building meaningful numbers of affordable housing, greater than 20% under inclusionary zoning. Changing the FLUM now also endangers our small businesses because, again, their properties will be assessed at higher values.
I'll take that maybe the second part first, which is to say changing the future land use map doesn't actually change zoning. It doesn't change what can be built immediately. So there's not a direct relationship to assessment and property value. That, if it is rezoned and in theory there's more that can be done, that could have an impact. But I would suggest that the most valuable land has, if you build in our city is where there are lots of units, and there can be lots of affordable units we've seen. I think what happens is the more units you can build on a piece of land, the less the land value is per unit. And that's generally true across the city. And that's why density, especially where we focus on corridors and transit, is important. So that land is more expensive, but if you can build more units on it, it actually lowers the cost per unit, makes it easier to build housing and then obviously affordable housing as well.
Okay, the next question, I'm just going to summarize this one to get to the heart of it, is there any way to require a reasonable percentage of the 2,000 units, affordable units, to be 2 or 3 bedrooms in size in order to accommodate families?
So I think this is the second one that's talking about the 2,000 units. And once again, I apologize because I think this was a chance where this was me maybe muddying the waters a little bit or not being clear at our last meeting. So the 2,000 units is a goal for all of Rock Creek West, which is mostly Ward 3, not entirely Ward 3. It only goes to the park. And Ward 4, sorry, the part of Ward 4 that comes over as well, sorry. Anyway, regardless, so it is for the whole planning area. Now, so I just want to make that clear. This is just one small piece of it. I think what we want to do with that 2,000 is work with communities like you, like Cleveland Park. I've been to their ANCs, to their ANC meetings, like Friendship Heights, to determine what would be appropriate for the different neighborhoods, or what would be ideal. In these neighborhoods, one thing that's worth looking at is there is a lot of family housing existing already. And so just looking at the dynamics, but I think that's something that we could certainly investigate with the commission. I think with the commission and with the community as we do the small area plan. Maybe I'm using those interchangeably. I would say too, once again, it becomes a little bit easier to in the small area plan to say, here's the kinds of things we'd like to see, and to be a little bit more prescriptive on the government-owned parcels, because those we have more control over. But those are the kinds of things that's important that we can articulate, and then could be part of a community benefits agreement with the PUD, for example, if that comes on a private parcel.
Okay, the next question was the district CFO says that there are 20,000 vacant units in DC right now. Why is OP pushing for new for-profit development when the developers have continually failed to provide affordable housing and have created the affordable housing crisis?
Yeah, this is an interesting point I've heard a few times, and I think I think that it's worth explaining the vacancy rate because and we can share. I actually looked up the numbers here, but also what goes into the vacancy rate. So, I was looking at the CFO's report prior to COVID. So this is 2019. We had a 7.1% vacancy rate with 10,000 vacant units out of an inventory of 143,000 units. The vacancy rate has gone up primarily because it's right now it's gone up to 11.8% or 17,861 in in Q4 of 2020 for 2 reasons. One is COVID has caused a lot of, obviously has just changed the market, all the markets. But number 2, there have been a lot of housing deliveries in the city. It's 150,000 units now. So that's 7,000 more units, 7,500 more units than in 2019. So I just want to use those numbers as a baseline. But to say, so I'll say it's higher now in DC and in other cities than it has been. If you look before COVID, is actually a relatively healthy vacancy rate. And what that means is you don't want all of your housing occupied all the time. That means people can't move. It's sort of like employment. You are always going to have a little bit of unemployment in the market, and you need that because that allows it to be to move. So a vacancy rate is of where we were, which is about 7%, is not unusual, and it doesn't signify that there are lots of units that are going unused. That being said, I was reading the literature about this, and it was saying one of the things that cities can and should do is a vacancy tax. which is something that we do have in the District of Columbia. If a property is vacant, it gets taxed at a higher rate. So we are implementing the best practices to try and ensure that as much housing is on the market as possible, but recognizing that a housing unit or units might be offline for renovation, for people moving. There are all sorts of reasons why you kind of need vacancy.
The next question, wouldn't reducing heights and density make the provision of affordable housing more problematic for any developer, nonprofit or for-profit? Seems like the upflump is necessary to achieve any affordable housing goals.
Yeah, so I would say that I don't think there's a reduction of density that we're discussing. It really is, do we go from this more the MU3, or how do we go from MU3 to MU4? What alignment or what kind of guidance do we put around anything that might be a PUD? So I just want to clarify. I think that's the question, and I think the answer hopefully is similar to what I said before, which is the idea is that you can get more housing if you provide more density. And as mentioned, if there is a change in zoning, we get additional potentially inclusionary zoning unit, or we would get more inclusionary zoning units provided it's more than a 9-unit building.
Okay, the next question, would taking housing out of the for-profit market increase the proportion of affordable units in any apartment building or limited equity co-op?
So I think the way I'd answer this is to say all housing, in this country is in a market of some sort. Limited equity co-ops and community land trusts are one way of helping produce housing affordability in that market. In fact, yesterday, the Deputy Mayor's Office awarded Langston Slater Historic Buildings in DC to Community Land Trust, recognizing that can help create long-term affordability. That could be a tool that is used here, especially for the district-owned parcel. And so I think I want to say that we would want to look at all the tools and options to try and ensure that the affordable housing production. And the nice thing about community land trusts and limited equity co-ops is they oftentimes, especially community land trusts, have long-term affordability. Commissioner, I think I'll just say too, I think we've talked about maybe having more housing focused discussions. This could really get very weedy about the different tools. And I would like to, I think there's a value in doing that for those who are interested. We can talk about how community land trusts work, how limited equity co-ops work, some of the they have worked well, but they've also had challenges in our city. So I think just having those conversations, talking about how the subsidies work, the Housing Production Trust Fund, or just what they are, I think would be a useful conversation. But it might be it might put everybody to sleep, or it might keep us here till 11 o'clock at night. But I think a separate housing conversation for those who want is necessary, and maybe multiple conversations if needed.
Okay, I'm going to skip to another topic now. What the small area plan can address in this process. First, can the small area plan protect small businesses and prohibit chain stores from changing the character of the commercial strip?
So I think the small area plan is a plan. So this is it has the strengths and limitations of a plan. I think what it can do is articulate what is important. It can articulate if there are preferences or things that should be changed, especially around zoning, but around laws as well. And I think that it could also as I hear that question, I think how can we, the question is as much about how can we encourage local and small businesses, and maybe even Black-owned businesses or women-owned businesses being a part of this. And those are questions that are both, if that's something that the community is interested in, that we can look at the tools that we have, whether it's grants from the Deputy Mayor's Office, whether it is zoning, whether it's laws. I think those are all things that could be discussed and would be explored if interested in the small area plan.
Okay. what protections can the small area plan include for the historic buildings on the west side of Connecticut? For example, the Avalon Theater and the Chevy Chase Arcade.
Well, the good news is it doesn't need to include any because they are designated landmarks, so they are protected. But I do think the small area plan could look at them you can protect the buildings, but also think about how they relate to the buildings next to them and the context and the street. And so I think the small area plan can contextualize them. I'm sorry to use that word. I feel like I've used it too much, and it's such a term of art, but can think about how they relate to the corridor and how they relate to opportunities. So those buildings themselves are protected. But I think that you also I think great historic preservation is thinking about how that can support how they interact and can be well supported by the buildings around them.
And the next one is there any thought as to parking issues and increased traffic generally in the area? Very concerned regarding the current lack of public transportation here to support additional housing.
Yeah, so I think one thing I think that has even come out from this discussion that should very much be a part of the small area plan is looking at the transportation needs and options. So already we've talked about the bus proposal, which I think was, it sounds like it was jarring here. It was also jarring in other communities I've been to, and what the needs might be. I think also connecting with the DDOT reversible lane study on further down Connecticut Avenue and how that relates or doesn't relate. So thinking about how there can be various modes of transportation. And as we look at what the potential development would be or housing would be, I think it's thinking about what the impacts would be. I would suggest that I think this is a modest change and it would be over a long period of time. And so we'll get a sense of what impact that might be as we further investigate with the community. And obviously we would want to understand those impacts and make sure that we're working to mitigate them.
You specifically address the parking issue. I know that's a concern with a lot of people.
I think that is something that we can address. I mean, we can look to. Yeah,
that would be included in the small area plan. Then some planning with regard to parking too.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And then the next question in this section on what the small area plan can address is how will sufficient infrastructure be provided to our growing population? For instance, addressing overcrowding schools, public transportation, traffic, pedestrian safety, small businesses, public spaces, etc.
A small area plan is meant to think about those issues. Overcrowding schools are a whole, that is a large issue, I think, outside of even the context of this particular boundary, but it's something that can be that I think we would want to be cognizant of. I would say, I think it's looking at how much housing and what kind. We have found that oftentimes, especially multifamily housing, doesn't produce a lot of children. Montgomery County has found this, and we have found it too. So I think we would want, if it's, for example, if in the community center, and I'm not saying I'm just giving an example, I'm not saying this is the way it's going to be, but if the community center, if there were senior housing built above, that would obviously have less of an impact on schools and on parking as well than other types of housing, than if it had 2 or 3 bedroom units. And so those, as we further refine options, or not options, as we further refine our understanding of what this could be, we would take those into consideration.
Peter, you have something specifically on this point?
Just,
I do want to really focus on.
No, I understand.
Question.
This is related to that question. I'm
Okay.
only raising
All right.
the comments related. And so I understand this correctly, or maybe I misunderstand this, but the weight of the question goes to infrastructure, particularly schools. Is it not true that the framework element which your office authored and which the council passed some time ago, which is a piece of this comprehensive plan, said we don't need to look, or this is not part of the looking at changes in the comprehensive plan, issues like schools? Or maybe I misunderstood it.
I don't think so. And in fact, I think as part of the council's work on the comp plan that's happening now, they're explicitly linking these things. So I think it is something that we would want to look at. You know, I'll say that our support for the deputy mayor's office, I'm sorry, for the schools, DCPS, as well as deputy mayor's office for education is oftentimes around data and making sure that they understand, you know, even if we were to make changes on Connecticut Avenue, there are changes that happen even in the single family housing. There's student generation that happens as much from those housing units that I already mentioned. So that part of our job is to coordinate with them to make sure that their projections are aligned with the growth.
Okay, the next couple of questions have to do with the scope. I'm talking about really the geographic scope of the small area plan. The first is, could you clarify your comment as to the corridor relating to the surrounding streets in the half block off of Connecticut Avenue? You had said no changes to single family zoning, but this doesn't sound consistent.
Yeah, so I think there are kind of two elements to this planning effort. One is the area of proposed land use change that is, you know, the half block off of Connecticut Avenue. That is where there could be zoning changes, you know, that are different than what is possible today. That is from based on the comp plan potential, you know, the potential comp plan that the council is working on now. And that is why, that's how we had, you know, that's how we started this conversation with ANC 34G 18 months ago. When we do planning though, we don't just want to plan that strip. We want to look at how it relates to the areas around it. Typically we go, you know, we usually do a little bit larger areas than this, but this is our smallest small area plan. But we still want to look at the context. I keep using that word and I apologize, but we want to look at the neighborhood around it and to understand how as you walk from the neighborhood into Connecticut Avenue, what that would look and feel like. So it's not to say that there's any proposed, there cannot be any proposed changes to the zoning outside of that strip, but it is meant to say when you plan, you want to look at how these areas relate.
Okay. Well, the next question was about step down zoning. I think you've just answered that there's not going to be any change in zoning aside from the immediate area around Connecticut Avenue.
That's right. You know, that if the community came out and said, we want much more zoning, I mean, we could make that a recommendation for the next comp plan, but there's nothing, you know, I don't think that's in the scope, and we don't expect to hear that. We really want to focus on, you know, that corridor.
Okay, there are a couple of questions in about the composition of the Community Advisory Committee that is helping the Office of Planning with the small area plan. The first is, why are there no representatives on the CAC of affordable housing experts like Empower DC and One DC or other representatives of the community that need and are seeking affordable housing?
I think it's worth taking a step back to say the Community Advisory Committee is really, it's meant to be folks in the community, and the vast majority of the representatives are not only from the Chevy Chase community, but actually within the boundaries of the small area plan, which I think is pretty unprecedented for us. There's this, we do seek to try to have a diversity of stakeholders from the neighborhood and different organizations and representatives of organizations. But when it comes to kind of more of that subject matter, we need advice. We want advice from those groups. They will be a part of the small area plan. This Community Advisory Committee is not the be all and end all of advisory groups or of input. And so we do, you know, I think there will have to be, especially around housing, additional advice sought and received from organizations like those mentioned. So the intention is to ensure that we engage as moving forward, not only with the community, but with those types of organizations moving forward.
You may have already answered the next question, but I'll just pose it and you can tell me whether you've got anything to add. The community deserves effective, empathetic outreach to key stakeholders. Who has spoken and how to diverse families to learn what we need to, what they need to live here affordably? Who has spoken and how to people across the digital divide? Who has spoken to workers in local businesses, the very people who keep our community going, and who are the lower income, diverse people we want to be able to live here, should they choose to find out what they would need to live here affordably? Who has spoken to specialists in community-driven development?
I like all of those groups, and I think that those, as we begin this process, we are interested in reaching out to those groups, but more importantly, we're interested in partnering, and I appreciate the work that the commission has done to make sure that we are thoughtful about reaching out to various stakeholders within and outside of the commission. But I think that will all be a part of this. I think as well, we are open, especially in these pandemic times, we've learned some lessons about outreach, but we need to learn more. We're continuing to learn about how to reach residents better where they are. And that, it is different in each neighborhood. I know in Congress Heights, for example, we've made a very explicit point of reaching youth who are harder to reach and to hear from. And so I think it's hearing from you, from the neighborhood, from community about those groups. And not only to say we should reach them, but if you have ideas about how best to reach them, it might not be an evening meeting. It might not be an online survey. I think those we really do truly want that breadth of input, and we are willing. We want to try and find the best ways and tools to reach those stakeholders and residents.
Okay, the last of the questions that was put on the Q&A or the chat in our last meeting, and it deals with the relationship of the small area plan to the comp plan. And we know that the comp plan is very much in flux at the moment. They're still probably redrafting it as we speak at the council. But in case the community doesn't agree with the developer's decision in the future, which document would control at the appeal level, the comp plan with higher density in the FLUM, or the small area plan, which is adopted at a later date and may designate a different density?
Yeah, so here's, I'm gonna try and answer that question without getting too weedy. Please hold me to account if I cannot. So I think what they're saying is if there's a disagreement with a zoning commission decision, around, and this would likely be a PUD, I guess. So let's just, if that works, why don't we say that?
Okay.
And I'll use previous cases as examples. What happens is it gets appealed to the Court of Appeals. Well, first of all, I would like to say, hopefully, through this process, we can create standards that developers follow, that the zoning commission follows, and that will be done without litigation. I think it's worth saying our intention is to avoid that world and to avoid anyone on either side having to pay the money and the time to do litigation. So that is a goal in many ways of the small area plan. That being said, the way that it would work is the zoning commission decisions are appealed to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals looks at how the decision was made and whether it is not inconsistent with the comp plan and other guidance. So the comp plan is the driving document, but the guidance that's provided in the small area plan, which is approved by council and as a resolution, then would fill in for their would also be guiding in terms of their decision.
Okay, Lisa, did you have a comment or question?
Yes, I just wanted to go back to the comment, Director Trueblood, you were making regarding involvement of the various community groups. So do you have a specific strategy on how to get that to occur, or right now is it just something that you would like to do? Is there a strategy that you guys used in the past to make sure those voices were heard? How do you plan on actually accompanying that?
I think that is a part
Sorry.
of, so right now we are putting together, I think with, we're putting together kind of with the Community Advisory Committee, what a potential approach and strategy might look like. And so I think we have tried different techniques in the past. We have, and you know, I'll have to say some of them were pre-COVID. You know, we have gone to the funk parade and tried to engage people at community events. We have, as I mentioned, engaged youth and done events and gift cards to get them to participate. You know, we've in other places we've targeted senior populations, or you know, and that's in some of our work. For example, that's happening in Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast. So I think it depends on the neighborhood. I think I really like the idea here of the workers at stores. You know, I think it's really looking at each of those populations, because each of them have different opportunities, have different constraints about when they can engage and how. And I think we can work together, or I think if we identify them, we can maybe suggest ideas. We also are very interested in hearing ideas if you from you all. I think there are things that we're learning in this world together.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to add to that. So the community or people that have organizations, you talked about populations. I would love to see our seniors involved. The residents that are in the buildings or apartment buildings along Connecticut Avenue, I would love to see them engaged. Do we send that information directly to you or someone on your staff? How do you want to solicit that?
So I would say you can always send it to me. It's andrew.trueblood@dc.gov. I will immediately loop in the project team who is working on this. If you have a relationship with Erkin Osberg, you can send it to him as well. But you can always, if you send it to any of us, we'll make sure to get it. So I like those ideas. And, you know, for the apartment buildings, it might be working with the management to pay, you know, to paper the buildings or to set up, you know, information or coffee hour, you know, depends on COVID. We would do, you know, you could do coffee hours if it weren't, but I think we could maybe think about what those are and work to make sure that those approaches make sense.
Okay, thank you.
But Commissioner, you mentioned something that I don't know if I mentioned, which I think is important. I think I maybe mentioned it last week, but the idea of seniors, but the idea of aging in, the term is aging in place. I like saying aging in community, because it might not be in the place, but creating opportunities for residents to age and be in their community with their community. Maybe in buildings that are more, or, you know, in apartments or buildings or units that are more appropriate, that are accessible. And so I think that should, and hopefully is very much a part of this. We're partnered with Age Friendly DC, which is thinking about these issues. And I think that could be a very important thread of this if the community thinks it is.
Great, thank you.
We've got 30 minutes left, and we've got, I see, nine questions in the Q&A. I'd really like to get through. Director Trueblood does have a hard stop at 8, so we need to use our time wisely. Michael, did you have a comment?
I just had one quick follow-up question on the previous question on the interface between the small area plan and the comp plan. You answered the question in relationship to a PUD application. Leaving that aside, if the comp plan sets a height standard at 65 feet, for example, and the small area plan sets a desired height at 50 feet, and what's the relationship between them? So you have a comp plan that says 65 feet is authorized, a small area plan that picks a height that's something less than that. And it's not a PUD, so they're not seeking to go above that which is permitted. How would one reconcile a difference between those two?
So we might need, this might need to be a discussion just to make sure I clearly answer your question. So the comp plan doesn't set heights, right? It sets general density, high, medium, low, residential, commercial. There are guidance around what that looks like in terms of FAR, but there's not a height. There's not height limits like there is in zoning. What it does do, though, is if you look at this particular stripe that's proposed, it would align with an MU4 zone district, which has those heights that we saw. So that's how it translates. Does that make sense? So it's not really a comp plan. It's really how you translate the comp plan into zoning.
Right, but it would translate into 65 feet is my hypothetical.
Oh, so it would translate into MU4, which is the 50 feet. With the hypothetical 65 would be with a PUD that would require obviously
Okay.
community sign off and input. And you know, I was actually talking to the team, and it would be very unlikely unless there was strong support from the community, which maybe through a small area plan there would be, that 65 feet would be supported in a PUD.
Okay, so let's say it's 50 with a 40 at the small area. I'm just trying to create a hypothetical that has where the ceiling in the comp plan as translated by zoning is at a height that's higher than the small area plan proposal. How I'm just trying to get what's the relationship between those two things?
I think so right now the height is 40 feet. Maybe the small area plan says in some areas we think it should stay MU3, right, because of X, Y, and Z, right? It would stay 40 feet. But in these areas, we think it should be MU4 and go up. And in these areas, we actually think there could be a PUD that could go even higher. So that's how the small area plan could kind of make kind of recommendations about where those different zone districts or zoning heights that are the heights that are set by zoning would apply.
And I guess I'm asking, are they recommendations which then are just that, or do they carry the same sort of force of law that the comp plan would carry?
So they would be approved by council, so they're not just recommendations, but in all instances, because it would be increasing the zone. So whatever, let's say there's some recommendations around where it could go to MU4, then then we could work together to, or not work together, but then there could be an action at the zoning commission to rezone those areas for MU4. So I think that's the action, the zoning, what happens in zoning is separate but influenced by what happens in the small area plan.
Okay. I've taken up too much time and I promised I wouldn't talk and I broke that promise.
John, I mean, we do need to get to these 8 other community questions. I don't want to leave them hanging at the end of the day. So, John?
I'll try to be brief. I haven't had time to share this with my commissioners, but from our recent discussions, we've been talking about zoning. We've been talking about other neighborhoods. I'll leave Brookland maybe out of this, although I did do some research on that. In terms of the zoning, I did get some information from the zoning board very, very quickly and maybe very superficially in terms of how things work out. Apparently, zoning can be changed as a consequence of either a comp plan or a small area plan. But my question is, if the SAP says the block between Livingston and Morrison should be 30 feet, which is a reduction from the existing 40 feet. And you have a property owner there who has a potential, opportunity there to go to 40 or maybe even 50. And the way the law reads, it says, if the proposed zone will not be inconsistent with the comprehensive plan or with applicable small area plans and will not result in adverse impacts to the environment and will not result in an undue diminution of property rights. And if somebody's holding a property now at 2 stories and has a possibility of going to 3 or 4, but the SAP says, no, you got to freeze it at 2, or you can only go as far as 3, that property owner is losing an opportunity for increasing his or her asset value. What happens then?
Honestly, I haven't considered the option of, or the possibility of downzoning. So I'd have to, I'm not sure that that's not necessarily in alignment with the goals of more housing. So it just, I don't think it was a part of kind of how we have been looking at the small area plan.
Okay, Lisa, you want to go through the questions that are in the Q&A? I think some of them are really more comments than questions, but
Yeah.
especially the first one, I think.
Yeah, I believe that's a comment too. One question, when you say missing middle, do you mean larger buildings on Connecticut Avenue step down into the side streets off of Connecticut Avenue? For example, triplexes, fourplexes, and higher on Military Road to say Chevy Chase Parkway?
That's a very specific question. And I think when we think missing middle, it typically is anything from a triplex or quadplex to a small walk-up or garden apartment. So it would, in this instance, I think it would be small apartment buildings, where you have residential over retail. We were looking at similar zoning, and you might, similar to what you might find, for example, in parts of Pennsylvania Avenue Southeast in Capitol Hill.
Okay. Next question, how tall and dense is 5333 Connecticut Avenue? Please discuss this building vis-a-vis plans for Connecticut Avenue north of Legation. Will we have one or more 5333 Connecticut Avenues in the area under discussion?
No, I mean, that building is much taller than what we're looking at. It's in a different zone. So, I mean, I think it's 100, you all might know better than me. I think it's 90 feet, probably then with setbacks up to 100. So
It's 100 feet.
Yeah, it's just a different scale than what we're looking at here.
Okay. Next question, there's quite a bit of commentary in here. It's basically talking about the difference in pricing on new commercial construction versus old. But they add, is there some way to avoid more national chains and storefronts that can afford higher rents after redevelopment? It's a good question.
I think it's similar to the question that was asked before about how to encourage small businesses. I would say we've seen especially good opportunities when there is a PUD that we can be a little bit more, that can be a part of either the proffers or part of the public benefits that are provided, which is to provide, retail space at or below cost for local businesses. And so that's something that I think through the small area plan sounds like is an important thing already. So it sounds like would be something likely that would raise to the top of something we'd like to see moving forward.
Okay. Another question. I'm gonna take a couple on outreach. Why not do postal outreach to alert residents of what's in process? The way the city sends flyers multiple times about leaf collection. Has that been something you guys have thought about?
In fact, we're working on postcards. So we are working on that one.
Okay. And this was more of a commentary, but one idea for outreach is to ask out-of-boundary families at the local public schools. Another question, I'm gonna go back to this one. My question was, I'm gonna read it as they write it. How is the traffic reversal decisions of DDOT related to the SAP?
That is something that we are obviously very aware of. We are working with DDOT. The nice thing about the SAP is that it allows that type of coordination, whether it's with DDOT or with WMATA, gets us all around the table. They can be aware of what might be happening here, or what the community is thinking, and we can be aware of what's happening there. So it will be a part. It is a part. It already is. We're already talking to them, but it will be a part of this planning effort.
Okay. Should the Rock Creek West portion of the comp plan encourage more affordable housing? If so, what do you think is the best way to do that?
So I think it does. The proposed comp plan that the mayor submitted, and as well as what the council is working on, encourages more affordable housing in the city, more affordable housing in high opportunity areas. It supports more affordable housing in Rock Creek West, including that goal of nearly 2,000 units. So yes, it does, and it will. And I think the council even strengthened language around housing. I think they're looking to strengthen housing language around what we call deeply affordable housing, the most accessible housing. And I think all of that is important, and all of that should or will, I think, play into our analysis here. I guess the question, I'd answer the question, which is saying this is one example of a way that we'd like to think about more housing and more affordable housing, but there are others. Some of it involves more investment in the Housing Production Trust Fund, leveraging all the federal dollars we're getting potentially to acquire properties, using vouchers, especially for residents who are experiencing homelessness. So housing, the housing issues and challenges are multifaceted, they're broad, and there are various ways that we're approaching them. And I think we will be, I think that housing maybe should be another deeper conversation for those who are interested in learning the programs, the funding, and all of that. I also believe there is, I think a group, Ward 3 Vision, is hosting something which may be more about financing, housing financing on, I see here, not April, is it April 22nd? Sorry, 7th. So I'll just put that out there as well.
Okay. Why not simply subsidize development of affordable housing? Forget the gratuity approach to such units.
It's a both and. If we don't have the units, we can't subsidize them. So we need to both. And let me it's a little more complicated. There's also lots of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. It's oftentimes older housing. It's housing that's typically in areas where there's already a lot of subsidized affordable housing, but recognizing that that is an important stock of housing to preserve too. We have a preservation fund for that, and we know we're helping those residents in that building, but we know there needs to be more. We have a gap in the housing that we have, that we need for our moderate and low income residents, so we need to produce more housing. So we both need to produce more housing and need to subsidize it. So it really is both of those sides of the coin.
Okay. This one says, what will prevent the new buildings in the subject area from being just a hodgepodge? What will prevent the new buildings in Chevy Chase, DC from being indistinguishable from the boring new buildings, all things that look the same downtown? How will we be sure to keep a supermarket here and interesting stores and restaurants at ground level? What restaurant owners will be able to afford the new high rents other than chain restaurants?
So I think there's a lot. It's a lot there. Let me say, I think I'll start with the first piece. Design guidelines. What does it look and feel like? I think that is something that is one of the nice features of a small area plan, is we can articulate some of those things. What should the streetscape feel like? So not only, what are we looking for in buildings and building facades, but also what does the public space, what does the sidewalk, what do open spaces, bus stops feel like? And so that is something that I think seems like an important aspect of this, and also because you can also get to what does the building feel like? Where's the retail and what step backs and I use the word articulation, but making sure it's just not a glass, not something that's not, some people like glass, so I shouldn't say that, but that it's something that feels like it fits in with the neighborhood. I think the nice thing about a small area plan is it recognizes the fabric that exists, the built fabric, and it seeks to support and build on that. So that would be my answer, and I think something that this small area plan would hopefully seek to do. The other thing, as it relates to the food grocery store, I think that can be a part of the visioning of what is an important asset in the community that ought to be supported or preserved. And then small business, I think I mentioned some of the important opportunities or some of the tactics there, but articulating the importance of small local businesses, I think sounds like it will be an outcome, but I don't know, I think that will be an important outcome. It's not only articulating that, but then saying, how do we get there? What are the government programs? How does the land use play into that? All of those things, that is a part of this process.
Yeah, that's important. Another one that's got a lot packed in here, just to forewarn you. How much affordable housing was produced for those who lived in well-loved, traditionally African-American neighborhoods downtown, and those neighborhoods were gentrified? It seems to me that most of those people were forced to leave their neighborhoods for places like PG County. Does anyone actually know how many people were displaced and forced to move out of their neighborhoods or out of the district? Why should we believe that more than token affordable housing will be provided in Chevy Chase, DC during this development push? I'm sure you have an answer to that. I've heard roughly 40,000 is what I heard on the displacement numbers, including my granddad, by the way.
So I'm sorry to hear that, but you're back, so that but I would say that the 40,000 number is based on the number of African American individuals that the population decrease of African Americans between 2000 and 2010. Between 2010 and 2020, there was an increase of about 15,000 African American residents. In both of those cases, it's complicated. Those are net numbers. Just because the number goes up doesn't mean there aren't people who are forced to move or want to move for various reasons. So I'm not, I don't mean to say that displacement is not and has not happened in the last 10 years. Certainly, we all can attest to that. What I am saying is that the data is very challenging to understand. Understanding one's motivation for moving. In some cases, it might be a family patriarch has died and it's split among many children who together do not want to, cannot afford to, or for whatever reason cannot keep the house, for example, and sell it. And so there's various work that looks into these more on the ethnographic side about how some of these various neighborhoods change. But I would say it is a place where the data is not, it's not where we would want it to be. It's in fact one of the things for those paying attention to the comp plan that the Council Office on Racial Equity has raised, which is disaggregated data as much as possible. But even if you disaggregate it, you don't necessarily know why. And that's the hard part. All of that being said, I think our intention is to try and be, try and do the things as much as possible within the tools we have to build opportunities. And that's what this is about. That's what the mayor's goals are about. That's what the 2,000 affordable housing is about. That's what it's about around public housing rehabilitation. And so all of these things are small, but they add up over time. And that's why this engagement is important. It might be a few units here and there, but it might be workers who now can live closer to where they work. It's a family that maybe wouldn't have been able to have the same opportunities. So we have to do lots of, a few big things, but lots of little, lots of little things to really address these issues.
Okay. And just on the data side, it seems like the numbers would be easier to obtain based on that public housing data, multifamily housing data, because we know what developments have been raised and, they have to track tenant numbers. So you might have a better idea to track numbers that way. Might be easier. Another question, are there plans to develop housing with the land at Fort
Lisa,
Reno?
Lisa, if I could we skip to Teddy's question, because I don't think that attendee has asked a question before. So, and Peter, I know has.
Okay. What efforts are being made in the comp plan or SAP to promote, require environmentally sustainable development? Green roofs, geothermal systems, water management, things like that, renewable energy sources.
So I would say the District of Columbia is actually a leader in our standards around green building. We have a thing called a green area ratio. We have requirements around stormwater management. We have requirements around building energy efficiency, and continue to build on those with the goal of the net zero goal that we have for our buildings. So I think it's pretty that those existing regulations are very strong across the city. It's something we benefit from. So I think if there are more things or if there's more on top of that, we can certainly look at that. But I do think that will be a key part of any potential rehabilitation or new development.
Okay. And then back to that original question, are there plans to develop housing with the land at Fort Reno, considering the history of displacement in the 30s and 40s?
You know, Fort Reno, whoever asked that question, maybe you know Director Donaldson, who I think raises this issue with me constantly, because I think it was, for those who don't know, it was an African-American community, actually grew up around the fort that was there, the post-Civil War fort, was then displaced by the federal government, the National Park Service, so that to create the park and the school and other things and the infrastructure. I do think those are interesting questions that would be important to have along with the Park Service. It's outside of the scope of this effort, but I think when we look at every opportunity to deal with, to support housing and to address racial justice in our city, that one certainly is an important one.
And last question in a Q&A, what is your response to the core critique that the comp plan will exacerbate racial inequalities?
I think I actually encourage anyone interested to read the core report. I think it's an example where the headlines maybe didn't, they took a headline that I think it was more nuanced. And if you actually read the document, it talks about the mayor's proposal and then what council has done. And it talks about, it really kind of highlights the limits of a plan for their type of analysis. Granted, remember, this was CORE's first major analysis. They were set up to really analyze legislation that requires something. A plan merely sort of allows something and guides it. So it, and I think this was discussed yesterday at the council, it cannot, other than land use, require anything. But I do think if you look at it, it talks about some of the exclusionary language around land use that's been inherited really into the comp plan. And it's also, so I think it's a good read. I would encourage you to read it. I sort of disagree with the headline. I don't disagree with the analysis. And I think I don't disagree with many of the changes that council made to talk about things like disaggregating data. Maybe I don't want to sound offensive, but I do want to say that, this core was actually created after this was submitted to council. I think if core had been around while while the public review period was going on, or even before, I think we could have had really great conversations, and this could have been informed then. So I'm glad that they are weighing in and council is listening to that. And I think it's making the document better.
Thank
Okay.
you. Randy?
Peter, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Director, I have two questions, a specific one and a general one. The specific one has to do with a remark you made several answers back that addressed increased apartment buildings, maybe small apartment building, but apartment buildings in the residential areas. How do you square that with saying very early in this discussion that there's not going to be a change of zoning or density in residential areas in the study area for the small area plan? I think the answer is that, in fact, there's not going to be a density change until you rewrite the comp plan in a couple of years, but I'm not sure. How do you square the two?
I must have misspoke. I didn't mean small. I didn't mean in residential areas. So we're talking about small apartment buildings in the commercial corridor.
Okay, so that's not to dwell on this because I know we only have a couple minutes. The general question is this. A great deal has changed with COVID. We don't know yet how much has changed. We don't know how the city will, whether the city will resume the kind of growth it had before, or have greater growth or have less growth. One of the things that has changed that we do know about is there's a great deal of public money for affordable housing in the American Rescue Plan. It's a general question. The strategy, correct me if you think I'm mischaracterizing, the strategy that is currently being pursued by your office and by the Bowser administration has to do with partnering with developers, with private developers. A great deal of it has to do with partnering with private developers and enticing private developers to do some good while they do well. Does the fact that there's so much more money for affordable housing, public money for affordable housing, change that equation at all? You talked very early on about the benefit we have in the public has in being the owner of the library community center or WMATA.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about all this public money? Why don't we use that to get a seat at the table and be able to produce development that we have much more influence over?
Thank you. It's actually it's a good question, a good point. I think that we should talk about, or we should make sure we raise in the small area plan, and it's very timely. But I just want to say, all of our housing is produced by the private sector, whether it's a nonprofit developer or a contractor. The government doesn't produce any housing, not even the housing authority. The DC Housing Authority does maintain. They're the only public entity that maintains public housing. So I just want to say that then everything is a partnership with the private sector in one way or another. It's just different ways of doing it. And I think to your point, I think we need to do both. We need to both look at the land we own. It's so funny because even in my time in government, I've been in government since 2013. When I got in, it was all about we need to own less land. We can't even, we have these vacant buildings that need to be gotten off. We can't maintain them. We need to get rid of them. We shouldn't be thinking about acquisition because all we need to do is get these things out of our portfolio. I think now we're at a very different point. We have money and we have needs. And I think for the first time, I hear talk about acquisition, really. And that could be buildings. It's not the worst time to acquire a potential building, especially if for whatever reason it's vacant or it's a hotel that is closed. For example, it's not a bad time to acquire land for the purpose of exactly what you say, because when we bring the land to the deal or the building, then we can put a lot more requirements on it. We can require it to be 100% affordable, or so I think I agree with you, and there is an interest in doing that. There's a group of people, including the Department of Housing and Community Development, including the Deputy Mayor's Office. We're sort of advising a little bit on land use, looking at these opportunities. And I think if there are some in or around the study area, honestly, that should be something that's raised and recommended. And if not, even to your point, even if not, it could be saying, be on the lookout. Like part of the small area plan could say, there's nothing at this time, but you should be, you should work to identify properties or this or that. I think there could be a recommendation around acquisition, even if at this particular moment, there's not a specific example.
Okay, Director, thank you very much. It's 8 o'clock and I think we finished all the questions and we're in pretty good shape here. So thank you very much for both the last meeting and for this meeting. You've been very helpful and insightful, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you all. I look
final
forward to
words from anyone?
No,
If you
just
want to
thank
join
you
us
so
on
much.
Monday, feel free.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
We need to let Stephanie
I'm
Harvest.
I'm
Yes, I
letting
think so.
letting her do
I think
that.
so. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Connie. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie's got it. So I'm ending. Okay,
Okay, and you said it.
thank you. Thank you, folks.